the SEC is going to be shocking to Texas, Oklahoma. I think the Pac-12 schools, creativity, Jedd Fisch, Lanning, Lincoln Riley, you're going to find out they're not Iowa and Purdue.
Hello and welcome to Always College Football. I'm your host, Greg McElroy, and welcome to a Wednesday edition. It's August 14th, and we have a bunch that we need to get to today. Along with me, as always, Mark Kubiak, Jack Foster, and Jake Garcia. We have a very exciting show as one of our favorites. Good friend of the show, Colin Cowherd, will join us for a season preview. If you haven't been following what Colin's had to say about college football, he's very bullish on a handful of Big Ten teams, and he's always been very supportive of the SEC. So be curious to see where he falls now, and maybe there's a sleeper that he leans towards out west that might, just might, be very close to his hometown of Los Angeles, California. We also are going to dive in to some more what-ifs. We've done a handful of these already. Today we have 4. A couple that relate to week 1 and a couple that relate to teams that have most notably been elite on defense. And maybe that won't be the case this year, but will the other side of the ball potentially elevate? We'll find out as we move forward with our conversation with Colin Cowherd.
I kept saying on the 12-team playoff and the NIL and the transfer portal, college football will be different. It'll be magnificent. It'll still be lopsided. The big dogs will still have the best rosters, but it'll look a little different. It'll end differently. It's going to be fine. So the audience, the consumer, is telling you, Greg, we're more excited for college football than ever. In the South, where you have your footprint, there was a lot of consternation about change because the SEC was king, and you worry about the Texas money and the Michigan, Ohio State, Notre Dame money. What is the sense about NIL, transfer portal, 12-team playoff as of today in the South?
Well, it's still actually really well received, Colin. I mean, the thing about the SEC is they still are going to have more access to talent just because of just sheer proximity. And while I've used this analogy a couple times, the alumni network is not nearly as big as that of an Ohio State, where they have 1 million living alumni, 60,000 undergrad for the last 100 years, however many years it's been. The level of intensity and passion that we have in the southeastern part of the United States for the sport and for the teams is unrivaled. So while you make 100, I make 100, you live in Los Angeles, I live in Birmingham, Alabama, I'm going to give $22 out of the 100 to Alabama because that's the team I support, whereas you might give 11. It's right. Just kind of the way things have worked, but for all intents and purposes, it's kind of been viewed as a personal challenge to the teams in the Southeast to step up from an NIL standpoint, compete with the big dogs, and even if they don't have the deepest pockets, they have access to the most players. And in the portal, when guys might leave for the big payday as a freshman, when they go in the portal after year 1, they might be more likely to come back home at their second stop. So a lot of programs have taken that route as well.
Yeah. So there's a lot of different things to talk about. I've said that we need to temper not only expectations, but criticism of coaches when they go to schools. Look how long it took Dabo Swinney or Jim Harbaugh. So when Harbaugh and Lincoln Riley are interesting comps. So we know they're both good coaches. Nobody disputes that. Jim had a longer resume. And obviously, the transfer portal is a more vigorous. I mean, there were people transferring 10 years ago, but not to the level now, the machine It is.
Right.
And I said, but if you really look at Brian Kelly and Harbaugh, they doubled the wins very quickly. But it was sort of pseudo, can't compete with Alabama, Georgia, but they won the games they should have won. And Brian Kelly gets to a Natty and gets blown out. And Michigan, would face Ohio State, and it was fool's gold. It took both about 7 years, 8 years to stockpile talent where they could play a Georgia, Bama, and the games are good. And you could, on television, you're like, oh, there's pros on both sides. The Manti Te'o Notre Dame team in the national championship, it felt like it would have finished third in the Pac-12, but a lot of it's scheduling. So I say with Lincoln Riley, as bad as Notre Dame was and Michigan was, I don't think they were as bad as USC under Clay Helton. Not only were they 4-8, But people inside the program believe they only had like 12 NFL, maybe late round players, that it was Lincoln Riley identified after 2 practices, there's maybe 30 guys we can keep.
Yeah.
And so by being a play away from 12 wins in his first season was fairly remarkable for those of us closer to the program. And then the second year, they had injuries. Jordan Addison was gone. And frankly, they're just no NFL players. It was Caleb. And they kind of shut him down once they lost a couple of games. They had a defensive coordinator completely over his skis. So my takeaway is this idea that USC was going to vie for national championships, they were way better year one than expectations. That's not really who they were. They were an early Notre Dame or Harbaugh team. You know, Harbaugh got from 5 to 10 wins year one. That wasn't a national championship team. USC couldn't beat any good teams. They were just beating the crappy teams on their schedule because of the wizardry of Caleb and the coaching of Lincoln. So my take is, I think we're being too unrealistic, even with the transfer portal, to Brian Kelly right now in Lincoln, in that it's still, the sport still comes down to high school recruiting and chemistry and culture, and you can't do it in 2 years. Your thoughts?
The problem is you've had guys that have ruined it for everybody. The Josh Heupels of the world, that in year one, progress, year two, game changer, right? We've seen it with Urban Meyer. His second year at Florida, I believe they won the national championship. And we've seen it a handful of other times. Nick Saban at Alabama, 2007, 7-6. 2008, 12-0 with a chance in the lead in the fourth quarter to go to the national title. So, yeah, you're right. In normal circumstances, I think it takes 4 years to get a real evaluation on the trajectory of your team. That's my personal opinion. I understand that big dollars are in play here. And also, along with, I think tempers flare and egos are involved, and the collective doesn't feel like they're getting what they have paid for, they're going to be quicker to pull the trigger. But at the same time, I completely agree with you. And those that have said that Lincoln Riley he doesn't know what he's doing. He's way out of his, so far. I saw an analyst, a national analyst calling the other day say, oh, his tenure at SC has been a quote disaster. Well, to be a win away from the college football playoff in year one with the Heisman Trophy winner, sign me up for that disaster most of the week.
Two NFL players. One of them, Caleb, is a sophomore.
Yeah.
That team had no talent.
And he did a great job with them. The one thing that does concern me, and I've known Lincoln, when I was a commit to Texas Tech, Lincoln picked me up at the airport. I've known him for 20 years. So it's a little bit close to home with me, and followed him to his years at East Carolina, followed him in his time at obviously Oklahoma. So I'm wanting what's best for him as a fan of his and as a fan of the sport. I think it's great when SC's relevant. So I acknowledge all that he's done offensively, but I don't know, this is my observation from a distance, I don't know if they practice the way they need to practice to be as good along both lines of scrimmage to compete for championships. And that's the only question I have. And will he be too proud to adjust maybe the amount of full contact periods that they have? Will they maybe do some things offensively in a drill setting that might give the defense a slight advantage? Will they do things like that to help attract more defensive personnel and to create a tougher, more physical mindset? Because I saw last year they were a little banged up in spring. This was spring of 23. They said after like 9 practices, yeah, we're good. We're just going to do, walkthroughs or whatever. At Georgia, they're like, I don't care if we have managers putting helmets on. We're practicing. So I think that's the mindset that I'm just a little concerned about. But
sure,
I think the jury's out right now, and I'm actually really optimistic about SC this year more than most, Colin, to be completely honest.
Well, they get a schedule break. No Oregon and Ohio State. Michigan in a total rebuild. Same with Washington. And LSU lost Jaden Daniels. That's the loss on their schedule. Everything else is winnable. Their only cold weather game is first week in November in Seattle, and I'm from there. You may get a sunny 64-degree day. I mean, seriously, you don't know what you're getting until Thanksgiving. So they got a scheduling break. Ohio State and Oregon are clearly the best 2 teams. I think Penn State's third in the Big Ten. And they get Penn State at home, by the way. They get Notre Dame at home. So they got a huge, it's almost like the conference said, let's give them a break as Lincoln Riley builds up. So they got a huge scheduling break. So I don't think 8 or 9 are out of the question, but I don't think they're in the same class as Georgia, Ohio State, Oregon, Texas, Bama. I don't even know if they're in the same class as Missouri. I think Iowa's better than people think. I think Utah's actually good. Ole Miss is excellent. I don't know. But I guess my pushback is if you go back to the first year, folks, they were a play from 12 wins with 2 NFL players. And that was, if you recall, the last 2 years have been, by Pac-12 historical standards, the conference was about as good as it's been. Our basketball school, Arizona, won 7 straight to end the season, beat Oklahoma. Like, we're not the SEC. It was really good by Pac-12 standards. We had Oregon State was viable.
Right.
So,
no question.
Yeah.
I'm with you, though. I am curious, though, what does success look like in year 3? Because I look at what was lost with Caleb Williams. And, well, I think Caleb Williams was the ultimate neutralizer. If there was a talent advantage on the other side, Caleb could elevate and neutralize that talent. But oftentimes he played so much out of the system. And this is not a negative.
Yes.
I mean, he improvised so much and he just didn't really stay true to what made Lincoln Riley an 8-figure a year head coach. I think that's going to be okay with Miller Moss. Or there's buzz about Mayava having really good and having some momentum. I'm not buying it, but I still think with that weaponry, I think they have 4 game changers at wide receiver, all sophomores, I might add. I really like SC's personnel offensively, and I think it will allow Lincoln's exo acumen to shine this year, as opposed to just seeing Caleb run around and create magic the last 2 seasons.
It's like I have a source inside USC football.
No, there's no way. I'm shocked to hear that. Based on how much insider information you have.
You have literally touched on something that is the great unspoken with the program, is that they played actually in more structure in Caleb's first year.
Right.
By the second year, injuries to the O-line, Lincoln got very tentative once the national championship playoff was out to get Caleb hurt. And frankly, he felt he almost owed it to Caleb. He got a Heisman. He didn't want to get him hurt. They didn't trust the offensive line. And it became kind of an ad-libby offense in the last 3 or 4 starts for Caleb. And there are people that have told me it'll go back to being Lincoln Riley's offense.
Yeah.
It was the first year with Caleb and parts of the second. It sort of dovetailed, and it's not a criticism of Caleb. It's they didn't want to get him hurt. They didn't trust the O-line. They didn't call stuff because they didn't want to put him in a bad spot. And it really became, there was a backyard feel to a lot of what SC was doing. And Lincoln felt he lost the offense a little. So Miller Moss at the Holiday Bowl ran Lincoln's offense and looked fantastic.
Yeah.
And so I think to your point, you're literally touching on, that's why you're so connected. You're really touching on something that in the program, there's a feeling that Miller's going to play the tempo. It won't look like Oregon, Dan Lanning, and Bo Nix, where it's like, they're dialing up where to go.
Right.
It won't be quite that, because I do think they have really good young perimeter talent, but it'll be Lincoln's team. I'll give you an example. In the NFL, when Aaron Rodgers was there with young Matt LaFleur, it was kind of Aaron's offense, right?
Completely.
If you watch them last year with Jordan Love, it was the first time I had said this on the air that I watched the Packers and thought, oh, that's Matt LaFleur's offense.
Right.
You know what I mean? And it's not a knock on Aaron, but superstar quarterbacks are going to blow off the coach. They're going to go in the huddle, roll the eyes, sometimes for self-preservation. I'm going to do what I'm going to do. You wouldn't do that with Saban.
No.
But that happens more than people think, and I think it happened at SC. That's my point.
It's a completely fair assessment. But tell me this, if you're Caleb Williams, are you going to hand it off in an RPO? Probably not. Why would I? We're better with the ball in my hands. I think I'll just I'll take this thing over and we'll see where we go. What do you make of the Big Ten as a whole? Because I think you obviously with your alignment and do an amazing job covering the sport, and appreciate, frankly, on your national platform, how you cover the sport, because so many people are like, oh yeah, we'll do college football because we have to. You do it because you love it. And I appreciate your coverage. But when you look at the Big Ten, I think that they're solid. I think at the top, they're super elite. Ohio State's the best team in the country, fewest questions. Beyond them, I think Oregon, we've kind of put Oregon in kind of the chosen group of, hey, this group's right there. And they didn't, like, their wins last year were fine. Blowing out a Utah team was impressive, but it's not like, we got way bent out of shape about, oh, they beat Cal by 30. Like we kind of anointed them, I think, before we needed to. And then we found out against Washington that maybe there's still work to be done. I think they've done that work.
Right.
So I think they are now on the inside looking out at the rest of the college football world. But how do they stack up against the SEC? Like, when you look at the Big Ten, you size them up, cut them up, 18 deep versus the SEC 16.
Right.
Who do you think is superior?
Well, I think Oregon is something that we haven't seen out west since Pete Carroll and Ed Orgeron. They've just done it differently. They've purchased big bodies. So I think Oregon stacks up in the they went out and they bought the best left tackle on the West Coast in the last several years, 2 years ago. He started. They went and Phil Knight has essentially said, before I die, I want a national championship and I'll spend whatever it takes. People talk about the Texas NIL. Oregon's is unlimited. They'll just buy whatever they have to. That's really how it's done. USC's is 13 million. I have that on 13 million. Depending on the ascension of the program, it could get to 15, but USC's fine. They're not Texas. They're not A&M. They're not Ohio State. They're not, maybe not Georgia. They're not Oregon for sure. So I think Oregon has purchased, and this is not a criticism. This is all legal now, right? It's, they've gone, first of all, their marketing is enhanced. Even with Mario Cristobal, their recruiting, to me, is the best on the West Coast. The best on the West Coast. USC's is consistently second because of the name brand. But Oregon's been recruiting the West Coast. Cristobal landing very well. If they want a receiver or a DB, they get them. Yeah. If there's a top edge rusher, they just get them. They own the Northwest mostly for the players they want. It's a very weak recruiting year, in my opinion, in the West Coast this year, especially the Northwest. I think they match up fine. I think eye test, Texas looks really big. When they faced Alabama last year, the last couple of years, I looked at it and I thought, God, this is what Alabama looks like the last 10 years against everybody else. You're like, man, Texas passes the eye test. I think Oregon's going to beat Ohio State and Eugene. Yeah. Because I think Dan Lanning has done something that I didn't think a Southern guy was going to do with no head coaching experience. He's immediately, I know what Oregon is. I really do. They're a little Detroit Lions. Relentless. They play hard. They got, I think privately they would admit Kalen DeBoer outcoached him. And Washington had a bizarre set of great offensive talent, almost no NFL bodies. And they matched up with Oregon. I mean, frankly, Penix deep ball, Rome Odunze. Oregon wasn't getting beat because they were being fooled. It was just a bad matchup. Yeah. I said it before. Washington was going to beat Texas. They were not going to beat Michigan. And so I think I watched Oregon play Washington twice, once live. I thought Oregon had more good players. I just thought Washington was a terrible matchup. So I think Oregon matches up with Ohio State. And I think if you match up with Ohio State, you match up with everybody. I think Alabama's underrated. I think Kalen DeBoer is magnificent. I think you know what he is, reminds me of? He's really Chris Peterson. Yeah, he does have some Peterson vibes for sure. Where you're like, they will never be outcoached at Alabama. Ever. There are games with Nick Saban where I felt if you had a quarterback that was good off script, you could frustrate Nick. I didn't think he was outcoached. I thought there were things Nick did better than other coaches. Kalen DeBoer, it's almost magical. Like Washington's talent on the defensive side is they had an interior defensive lineman who I think the Rams got undrafted free agent. Yeah, Latuli Nasanoa. They just have any talent. So a lot of it was magical. And Chris Peterson gets the Huskies to a playoff, and you're like, how? They don't have Alabama's players. So I think Oregon has purchased, recruited, and developed players. I think Lanning has a plan. I think they match up. I am not as confident with Ohio State because I just have felt for 3 years, and I'll ask you, Greg, it's not that Michigan beat them, it's how they beat them.
Yeah.
They just outrushed them. They took over all the second halves. Ohio State's never been prettier, but they've never been more finesse. I'll ask you, what are they beyond talented? What are they?
I think look, they have been a sports car where winning the Big Ten the last couple of years has required a big diesel vehicle, a dually, if you will. Like I don't want to say GMC or Ford and like tick people off. I would say Ford, it's Michigan, so that feels fair, right? Let's just go with that. They have an F-150 or an F-250. That was one in the Big Ten the last couple of years, just the reality. So I don't think that they're finesse, though. Like, I don't know if that's entire, and I understand the characterization and the way.
Yeah, by Ohio State standards, they're finesse.
Total, compared to the Urban Meyer version, 2015 Ohio State versions, that's finesse. But that was a group that was so outrageously talented. I remember watching that game in 2015 against Bama on New Year's Day, the first iteration of the college football playoff, with Zeke Elliott and Cardale Jones. Like, these guys are freaks. Now, not only can they fly, but these guys will pound you. They are so crazy physical. And I think that the Big Ten has long been a league that was won with physicality. And then Ohio State found, hey, we can win with physicality, but we also have some high octane machines on the outside that we need to feed. So I think they've kind of gotten away from themselves a bit. And that's why the hire of Chip Kelly was so massive. Because if you look 23 consecutive years, the team that has outrushed the other in the game between Michigan and Ohio State wins the game. You ain't going to outrush Chip Kelly. That's who he is. That's what he believes in. And while people will look at the Oregon years and think, oh, they were finesse. No, they weren't. Just because they used tempo doesn't mean they were finesse. Look at the UCLA years. Oh, because they wear the light blue, they're finesse. No. UCLA was far from finesse. UCLA ran it down LSU's throat. In the Rose Bowl a couple years ago. He has gone out and prioritized running back. They go out and get Quinshon Judkins. They already had Travion Henderson. The offensive line is a question mark. But what Chip Kelly can do is they're going to play hard and they're going to get by a little bit running the football with smoke and mirrors. So I think their traditional run sets that they've used the last couple of years, you're not going to beat Michigan with that because Michigan's got better D linemen than you have O linemen. I don't know why. They just do. And they've had that for years. And they're probably going to have it again this year based on what they bring back up front defensively. But if you have one side of the offensive line blocking one play, the left side of the offensive line blocking another play, two completely different plays, you're reading a guy right in the middle, you can't block him, so you might as well read him, and you got a pass play off of it, now you're cooking with gas. So I think Chip Kelly being hired by Ryan Day acknowledged that his run game was a blind spot. And that's a really hard thing for coaches to do too, right? Yeah. I mean, hey, I've won a lot of games. I've lost 5 games in my career as a head coach. Like, yeah, I got to acknowledge, though, that that's a little bit of a blind spot for me. I need Chip Kelly to come in. I'll handle the pass concepts. He handles the run concepts. And now we're going to make this thing work together perfectly. So I really like Ohio State this year, but you're 100% right. I mean, Michigan had their number. It was a terrible matchup, much like you just talked about with Oregon and Washington. Terrible matchup for Ohio State. And I wasn't surprised at all to see Michigan win 3 straight against them.
Yeah, so I'm predicting Oregon beats Ohio State in Eugene, but Ohio State gets further in the playoff and plays for the national championship. I don't know who they'll play. I think Alabama is the most underrated team. I think Texas and Sark's history. Let's talk Texas. I love Sark. There's things he does very well. He really knows, he understands because he lived in LA. He understands under Pete Carroll, branding, recruiting. He can really sell Texas. I mean, he watched the master in Pete Carroll take over college football. Like, he gets branding, he gets recruiting, he gets, all gas, no brakes. He really gets that. That's really, it's like a marketing mentor. His teams can be a little light on the details. Sometimes I think they play with more passion than smarts. I think sometimes I'm pulling my hair out watching his team play, but I like him. I like his story. He had some personal issues. He's overcome them. Impossible not to root for him. I like him. I really do. I root for people who have been bullied or have struggled, or have, people who just fall off the edge and climb back. So I love that story. Hey, Nick Saban made a career out of hiring guys whose careers looked over. He was a life preserver for Lane Kiffin and Sark, and I think that's an incredibly redeemable part of Nick Saban. But you tell me, and I love Texas, but I don't trust Texas. There's a big difference. I fell in love with girls when I was younger. Didn't trust them, but I loved them. There's the right, like, and that's my perception. I trusted Harbaugh teams. I trusted Saban teams. I trust Georgia teams. God, Texas is there's in a big spot. I'm just like, how do you view them?
It's perfectly fair. Here's my frustration with Texas. You see what they should be, and you see what they could be, and what they sometimes are, a la the Alabama game last year, the Texas Tech game at the end of the season, the Oklahoma State game in the Big 12 title. It's like you see what they're capable of. And it's like, my God, there's no one. This is the most complete team in the sport. Like they're winning it. Like Michigan doesn't want to see them. Bama doesn't want to see them. Florida State doesn't want to see them. Like nobody wants to see Texas except for Washington because they're going to throw it over their head.
Yeah.
But for whatever reason, you don't get that performance every week. And you don't really get that performance every quarter. Like when I saw, and you look, if you watched the best teams in the sport for a number of years, whether it was the Urban Meyer-led Ohio State teams, whether it was the Nick Saban-led Alabama teams, the Pete Carroll-led USC teams, something miraculous had to happen for them to lose games. I mean, it was like miracle, right? Like Sanchez has to go to Corvallis on a Thursday. It's raining sideways, and it's like the team has no business losing to Oregon State, but because of the circumstance, they lost. Urban Meyer at Florida, like Jevin Snead had the game of his life, scored 21 and beat him 21-20 on a last-second field goal or whatever it was. Nick Saban, I mean, Johnny Manziel had to have the most ridiculous thing ever. Cam Newton had to have the most ridiculous thing ever. Kick sixes, like weird stuff had to happen for those teams to lose. You look at Texas, they'll play to the level of the competition, and I can't understand why. Oklahoma last year, you have 3 turnovers in the first quarter. Biggest game of the year. At that point, after beating Bama 3-4 weeks earlier, you block a punt, you get back in it, you end up almost winning the game, and then you give up a drive at the end, quarterback draw, really to set the drive up, and then they go right down the field and score. And then you look at TCU, 5-17, you win by 3. You look at the offensive performance against Iowa State, and you're like, what was that? There's just some performance. Kansas State, they're in overtime. And Kansas State's got the ball inside the 5 for 4 consecutive plays, can't score. I mean, like that to me is strange. The year before that, if you want to go back a year before, they lose to Texas Tech on the road. You have, just circumstantial losses that just really don't make sense. So I understand the thought process because they are navigating to a league now where the TCUs of the world don't exist anymore. That's no disrespect to Texas Christian at all.
Yeah.
They're a good program. They're going to do great things. They're going to be back in the playoff hunt again at some point because of the league that they play in. But if you took TCU and put them in the SEC, I don't think it'd fare very well. Just the reality. We saw that on the national championship stage a couple years ago. So they're going to have to play on a consistent basis with more regularity. And that's, I think, the next step in the evolution to building Texas foundation that Sark wants to build, is that it doesn't matter who you're playing against, where it's at, what's the score. This is the expectation. This is the standard, and we got to play to that standard every week.
Yeah, it's I think what's happening in the Big Ten and the SEC is Texas and Oklahoma are both going to discover that you can end up going and facing Missouri, and you think, LSU in 2 weeks, we got better personnel, and you look up and you trail. Georgia went to Missouri.
Yeah.
Was it last year or the year before? And you're like, Missouri is kicking their ass.
Yeah.
you don't get that in the Big Ten. Now, Purdue once crushed Ohio State. I think that was an Urban team. It was like, what is happening? I think he had
2017. Like that was the one game at the end. It was like, what was that? Exactly.
Yeah, but that happens a lot in the SEC where you're like, you think it's the game before the game, and you're in Columbia, and you're like, we're getting pushed around.
Yeah.
And so I don't think Texas and Oklahoma, you can talk about it, you have to live it for a year.
100%.
That doesn't exist in the Big Ten. Whereas Ohio State has significantly better personnel than a good program like Wisconsin, like almost every position. So it was like you may have had a Penn State roadie and Michigan. They kind of match up. So the difference is, whereas Texas, Oklahoma are going to go into the SEC and go, All right, we gotta take a deep breath here. This is a little more consistently difficult than we thought. I think the inverse is true. I think Ohio State's going to go, oh, at Seattle, at Eugene. I think the Pac-12 teams going are more creative. I think they're much better at home. People have no idea how tough it is to play in Seattle in November. Everybody's talking about the cold weather in Purdue. Go to Seattle when it's raining November 18th.
Yeah.
So I think the Ohio States, Buckeyes don't go to Eugene. No, it's 58,000. It's the loudest stadium I've ever been in my life, except Gainesville. So I think the Big Ten is thinking, all these soft teams. Washington and Oregon playing crappy weather. UCLA is irrelevant now that Chip's left. USC, Lincoln's very clear. You don't face a lot of Lincoln Riley offenses, by the way, in the Big Ten. So I think the SEC is going to be shocking to Texas, Oklahoma. I think the Pac-12 schools, creativity, Jed Fish, Lanning, Lincoln Riley, you're going to find out they're not Iowa and Purdue, that both of those programs, Oregon and USC, are buying good players. They have real collectives. So that's my take. Your thoughts on that, my take on that.
I think it's 100% accurate. And we've all said, and I got into an argument with a buddy of mine who I respect greatly. I asked him, hey, what kind of style of football will win out in the Big Ten? Can the RPO and the high volume offense, could that potentially find its way to immediate success in the Big Ten? Or is it going to be a line of scrimmage league where, hey, you're not running it on us? Like, no matter what, you look at all the Big Ten teams. I don't care if you're Northwestern or if you're Michigan State, like the whole identity of Big Ten football is like, you're not running it between the tackles. Like, we're going to have 330 pounds, 6'1" dudes that grew up on farms that have been doing farmers walks with 400-pound dumbbells for 20 years since childhood. And just for fun, they go bale hay. Like, you're not moving these defensive tackles. So they got to get a little creative in the run game from time to time, but that's been the identity. The Pac-12 played the game on the perimeter. It doesn't mean they can't go toe-to-toe. I mean, they can.
Right.
Like, they can, but it was a perimeter game. And that's why Utah, I think, found great success in the Pac-12 in the last few years, because they could play the perimeter game, but they really were rooted with brass knuckles. You know what I mean? Like, their core was brass knuckles.
They forced their tight ends to block in Utah.
Like, you're having to find
Iowa of the
yes, 100%. Yeah. So here's the thing that I'm curious about. I don't care how bad SC's defense has been.
Yeah.
If Iowa has to score 30 to win, can they do it? And Iowa's a team that they're in the AP top 25. Like, they're a team that I have great respect for.
Yeah.
But in the event in which, hey, it's a race to 28, you ready to go? I really don't know how many teams, the Minnesotas of the world, the Iowas of the world, the Illinois of the world, how many of those teams are going to be comfortable getting into shootouts? Because I know SC will be perfectly fine. If you want to play to 50, we'll go first one there. I think Washington will be perfectly fine in that setting as well. In the event in which the defense has a bad day, the offense is a step ahead, are you comfortable getting to 42 to win? Because I don't know how many teams in the Big Ten are. The other thing is SC comfortable winning a game 13-10. Because you go play a team like Nebraska or a team like Iowa, that might be
crappy weather
the game that you run into. And I don't know, will Lincoln get frustrated? Will Lincoln get impatient like he did at Oklahoma? And the reason why Iowa State became a thing under Matt Campbell is because he could frustrate Lincoln Riley because they could never manufacture big plays. They would just play three safeties over the top. You're not throwing it deep. You got to take a bunch of checkdowns. And I bet if you have to snap the ball 17 times on an offensive drive, you're going to get greedy, you're going to get impatient, and you're going to throw us one. So that was kind of the MO. So I just think it's going to be fascinating to see how that all works. But I think the Big Ten is probably collectively sleeping on how physical the Pac-12 is. Not that that's their bread and butter. It's not. And they won't be as physical as the teams that they face in the Big Ten. But I think that they can go toe-to-toe more than people are probably assuming at the moment.
So I want to address something. People, I always think it's funny because I have defended Jim Harbaugh, who I think was viewed as my pesky rival years ago because a clunky interview I did, but that was not the truth behind the scenes. I had reached out to him and his family. So, and Jim's been great. That the reason I have defended Michigan and Connor Stalions is this. If in society we decided suddenly that bank robberies were legal, I would have a hard time buying into throwing somebody in jail for jaywalking. That the number one thing you were never allowed to do in college football, it was the death penalty, was buy high school players. Buy any player, but buying a high school player is a death penalty. That's now not only legal, it's encouraged. It's the model. So I'm not a crooked mustache on a sideline pass with a fuzzy iPhone. It seems ticky-tacky. Now, is it appropriate? No, it's not appropriate. Is there a level 2 violation? Absolutely. But when I read that of the multitude of level 2 violations, one of them was verifying an Instagram account by a Michigan assistant, I'm like, timeout. So you can get into a bidding war for a sophomore linebacker from Ann Arbor. So my take has been, it's all nonsense, is that the culture in the world changed. And jaywalking doesn't matter to me anymore. You let bank robberies now are legal. And we see this stuff in tech, politics. The world changes. So 10 years ago, I would have been much more punitive on Michigan. Like, hey, you can't do that because you couldn't do anything. Now I'm like, guys, it's bidding wars for high schoolers. I don't even care anymore. I really don't care. Whatever you do, you do. So that's my take. Throw it back at me and why I'm wrong.
I don't entirely disagree with you. I think that when you look at the world of coaching through a lens of morality, you're probably, let's just be honest. Like it's one of those, if you're not cheating, you're not trying. If you can't beat them, join them. It's like,
right.
That it's eat or be eaten. And I'm not condoning what went down at Michigan. I will never do that. But here's my thought. And I come from the Nick Saban school of personal accountability. Right. Okay. This is my own personal opinion. If you steal my signs, that's on me. That's my own personal opinion. Now, I played college and the NFL. Every single time I was sitting on the sideline, not as a starter, I'm trying to steal signs. Every single time. NFL, go and look. 2013 Cincinnati Bengals against New York Jets. I had gotten cut by the Jets earlier in the year. Geno Smith was playing quarterback. Pac-Man Jones is playing left corner. I'm staying on the sideline. I know Marty Mornhinweg and the entire West Coast offense signals. Geno signals under to the wide receiver. I tell Pac-Man under. Pac-Man jumps it, takes it to the house. All is fair. If Marty Mornhinweg and they know that I was with them in camp and I was now on the Bengals and you are going to just keep it as is, you're going to keep the same signal. If I were Marty Mornhinweg, this signal, the under signal, that would have been a stop and go. That would have been an under and go because Pac-Man would have jumped it and they would have been out the gate for a touchdown. I think we won that game like 49-7 or something along the lines of that. It was a lot to a little. So I think back at my career, and if you wouldn't change your signals and that gave me access to them, I was be able to create a competitive advantage. Now, a bridge too far is using recording devices. That to me is completely uncalled for and unnecessary. But the gamesmanship of stealing signals on game day, that's life. Or trying to get other information about guys that might have played there in the past or whatever. Like if you can get information, say, hey, guy transfers from Michigan to Ohio State. You think the Ohio State coaches aren't asking the player that transferred in from Michigan about Michigan schemes? Of course they are. It's not illegal, but it probably wouldn't be very smart for the Michigan coaches in that scenario to use the same signals that they used when that player was on their team. So I think that while it looks really bad in the court of public opinion, and while people think it had an impact on the integrity of the game, it's hard to disagree with that. But also things could have been done by the opposing team to not allow Connor Stalions information to become relevant on game day. So that's my whole thought process on it. But I think your reasoning for feeling the way you feel is perfectly fine. But my reasoning, just coming from a player's perspective, probably we're kind of saying the same thing. It's just coming from it at a slightly different angle.
Yeah, Ohio State felt 2 years before it was announced it was happening. And my take is, okay, if you're not switching stuff up, especially for Michigan, it's one thing if you keep some of your signals, but the Michigan game is you prepare for that differently. And if you knew 2 years out they were doing it, I don't want to hear that, they stole our signs. If you don't have, to your initial point, separate signs for the Michigan game. I mean, Urban Meyer talks about they scouted Michigan every week. You win that game. John Cooper won 11 games a year. He couldn't beat Michigan. All right. Harbaugh was a bum 4 years ago.
Yeah.
He was winning 11 a year. He couldn't beat Ohio State. So to me, it's like if you knew about it 2 years ago and you were investigating it, then you had to have been changing your signals or you have bad coaches. So I think we both get to the same spot, is that it's not perfect. It's kind of there, but it's murkier than people are saying, is what I'm saying. It's murkier. Everybody's stealing signs. I love your Marty Morningwyn stuff because I've had pro players, the backup quarterback's job in the NFL.
That's it.
That's it.
That's why I have an NFL pension, because I was good at that. Hey, I couldn't throw it, but I'm going to figure out your signals. I'm going to know your protection adjustments. Like, we're going to figure this thing out. It might be quarter 4 before I get it, but I'm going to try. I can promise I'm going to try.
Okay, let's do most overrated, underrated teams and close it out this way. I think Michigan's the most overrated in the top 25. They lost not only depth, they lost like leaders. They lost like locker room leaders, fifth-year seniors. They also lost the best quarterback Harbaugh's had, who I watched him before he got hurt, meniscus tear, had a terrific debut. It's very difficult to lose not only quality starters, but veteran quality starters, like who were clubhouse leaders. I think Michigan will not be a top 20 team. Overrated. I think underrated. I don't know. I think Brian Kelly's going to figure it out.
He's so
Jaden
good.
Daniels.
He's so good.
He's so good.
Yeah.
and I look at all those teams above him and I'm like, yeah, they're not going to beat Georgia, maybe Alabama, Ohio State, but people have them 11th, 12th, 13th. I'm like, nah, they're better than Utah. And I love Utah. They're better than Utah, though Utah returns a guy that's, I think, has been starting quarterback for them for 11 years, Cam Rising. So a little underrated LSU, a little overrated, a lot overrated Michigan. What say you?
Yeah, I'm good with the Michigan. We're on the same page there. My problem with Michigan is I've just heard a lot of buzz, and it's hard a little bit with that place to, all right, is this real or is it not? I've heard a lot of positive buzz about their offense and Alex Orji and how much he's progressed, and I've seen him run. I know he's a superstar with the ball in his hands, but I've also only seen him throw one pass. I've heard that he's got a monster arm, and I tried to watch him in preseason or in pregame warmups every time I've called a Michigan game, and when I was on the field, I stood right behind him and watched him throw it. I thought Tuttle threw it pretty good too, by the way, for Michigan. So I thought, hey, when JJ leaves, they're probably going to be all right at quarterback regardless. But I look at the rest of the top 10. Ohio State, they're going to be there, no doubt. So if you're going to quantify it as, quote, overrated, Ohio State's going to be there. Georgia's going to be there. They're a safe bet. I think Texas and Oregon are going to be there. I think Bama's going to be there. So the top 5 feel very, very safe. People have been saying Notre Dame. Look at their schedule. Like Notre Dame, they could go 9-3 and not beat a team ranked in the top 25.
By the way, end the year on the road in LA. And also, I don't know how good Riley Leonard is. I have no idea what he is.
I know that Mike Denbrock, their OC, though, did a pretty good job with Jaden Daniels, whose skill set was similar to Riley Leonard's when he arrived from Arizona State. So I think the development portion of bringing him along, Riley Leonard's been naturally kind of an inaccurate passer on the downfield throws. That's got to grow.
His whole career, he's wild.
Still optimistic, though, that it's in there because I've seen the underneath throws. If you can throw the underneath stuff, you can throw the intermediates, you can throw the deeps. It's just changing the arm angle, changing the shoulders, changing the trajectory, all that. I think Denbrock will do a pretty good job with him. I really do. Because I think it's a comparable player to what they brought in with Jaden Daniels. And that obviously worked out very well. I can't take them out of the top 25, though. Their schedule's too manageable. I mean, the toughest games bookend the season, SC and A&M. And people say, well, Florida State. I think Florida State going to South Bend is a pretty good spot. People say, well, maybe Louisville. Well, you don't think Notre Dame's had that one circled? They got blown out by Louisville last year at their place. So I think Notre Dame's appropriately ranked. Ole Miss, if people are not on their bandwagon, it's because they aren't familiar with what Lane Kiffin's done from talent acquisition standpoint. They're not overrated. Yeah. They're appropriately rated. You're just not comfortable with seeing them ranked that high. Then you look at Penn State, they're going to be rock solid. I am worried a little about their offense, but their defense will keep them in it, especially with their schedule they have. They're going to be fine. Their schedule is very manageable in the Pac-12 or in the Big Ten, I think. Missouri, I think, is the other that I would say maybe slightly over our skis there. So Missouri and Michigan, the two that I'm just not so sure about. Missouri, I think, is 11. Michigan at 9. As far as underrated. Now, you're going to say I'm crazy. I know this. I'm comfortable with this. I've been singing the praises all off season. I did this last year for a team and it ended up working out. I love Miami this year. They come in at number 19. Now, a lot of people are going to sit there and say, well, it's Miami. We do this every year. You know, the same people that are saying that right now are the same people that said, well, why are we building up Texas? Texas hasn't done anything since 2009. Why are you continuing to say that they're going to be good this year? Because they were. On paper, Texas going into last year was great. Now it's about allowing it to come to fruition. Miami on paper is great. Now it's just about, can they take the next step as a program and not beat themselves? This was one of the best teams in America in the first half of the season last year. And they turned the ball over against Georgia Tech, give up the big play on the fumble and the couple touchdowns, then they end up, that has a huge ripple effect throughout the rest of the season. Tyler Van Dyke can't shake the turnover woes, and he gets benched. Then they give Florida State all they want, and then their starter who replaced Van Dyke gets hurt. Van Dyke's back in the lineup. I mean, it was a disastrous season last year. They've upgraded a quarterback with Cam Ward. He doesn't turn it over. They couldn't score in the red zone with any regularity last year. Well, what helps in the red zone? Quarterback run game. Cam Ward can run it. They went and got the best running back available in the portal in Damian Martinez, and that was kind of a revolving door of players last year with 3 or 4 different guys that were all solid. None have rushed for 1,200 yards in the season like Damian Martinez did last year. The offensive line was a strength last year. It's a strength again. They get their top 2 wideouts back. Defensively, they have the best edge defender in the ACC who's only going into his sophomore year in Ruben Bain. They added 3 more 5 stars and a couple guys in the portal. They are stocked. The one question mark is secondary. And by all accounts, that group is playing well above what they anticipated at this point of the season. So I think Miami, people are going to look at them and say, well, here we are again. We always pump up the blue bloods. I think Miami's extremely capable with the personnel they have. And I'd be surprised if they're not in the mix in the ACC and ultimately in the mix for the playoff.
Greg McElroy, what a pleasure to see you. You crushed it. You are as thorough and as entertaining and fair. And that's a thing. College football can be regional and tribal, despite the fact that you live in the South and cover, the SEC. I've always thought, in a sport that is often way too regional, you are the king of common sense. And I just love, you really are. You know, means a lot. No, you know your stuff. You really bring a lot of credibility, in my opinion, to what you do, because I have to cover everything. I'm a mile wide. You're a mile deep, and your knowledge is just supreme. You're really great. And I hope the audience enjoyed this as much as I did, buddy.
Well, it's always so great to visit with you. And I told you already in the interview, thank you for all you do for college football. It really means a lot. I don't say that in tongue in cheek either. You could cover the NFL 3 hours a day, and the fact that you carve out a little slice for college football almost every day means a lot, and you do so much for us in the fall. So we appreciate the coverage you give us.
Good seeing you, man.
Good to see you, buddy. Great discussion there with Colin Cowherd. Fascinating to get his perspective on what the season looks like from his viewpoint. He does a great job. What we have always tried to do, though, is we try to serve the fan, and we have always felt like Mark Kubiak is our resident fan. And Mark, in this case, wants to answer these questions. These are things that have been kind of percolating with us. I've had a couple. He's had a couple. Jack's had a couple. Well, he came up with a couple today. What if Florida beats Miami in week 1? That's right. You heard that right. Me, as the resident Miami homer in the national media, What if Florida beats Miami in week 1? It's not completely out of the realm of possibility. Miami is a slight favorite, about 3.5, which is pretty considerable on the road at your rival in a home opener. But if that happens, it's one of the most significant victories in the recent history of Florida football. Not because Miami's ranked in the top 20. Florida's had wins against top 20 teams. But given the perception of the trajectory for Billy Napier, this would have a lasting impact. And if it's going to happen on the field, it's probably going to happen along the lines of scrimmage. If you think about what Miami has solidified the last 2 years, offensive and defensive lines, that's Mario Cristobal's bread and butter. He wants to be great along the front offensively. He's a former offensive line coach. It should come as no surprise. But he also has already gone out and put a high priority on getting additions, not just in high school recruiting, but in the portal to fortify his depth along the defensive line. Well, if Florida beats them, it means their offensive line had a heck of a day and against an outstanding defensive front. Miami last year finished 12th in the sport against the run. Miami also thrived on negative plays last year, 11th in college football, forcing a negative play 11% of the snaps. So this is a very aggressive group. This is a very dynamic group. It means the offensive line clearly did a pretty dang good job. It also means that Graham Mertz probably took advantage of a secondary that, right now, I've heard great things, but it's still fall camp. Probably took advantage of a secondary that was somewhat gettable last year. They were 55th last year in pass defense. So Graham Mertz and his talented wide receivers, everyone's been talking about, well, Ricky Pearsall's gone. Who are they going to throw it to? Well, that means maybe Wilson had a big day. Maybe a couple other guys that they've added had a big day. Maybe Jacoby Jackson, who's filling in for the injured Montrell Johnson, maybe he was able to create some seams in the run game at running back and created a couple big plays. It also means, too, with the additions that Miami made offensively, Cam Ward, Damian Martinez, some of the holdovers from last year at wide receiver with Restrepo and company, some of the holdovers, maybe Florida's defense has made drastic improvement from where they were last year in year 1 under Austin Armstrong to year number 2. Now, they lost some pretty significant pieces. Princely Uman-Mielen's no longer there. He's at Ole Miss now. But they feel really good about the young players they played last year, how many true freshmen and first-year starters got tremendous reps last year. And they've been very bullish all offseason about the progress they've made. Well, clearly that progress is vindicated with a big win over a ranked foe, a rival in week 1. Now, how would it affect Billy Napier? I think it would take the monkey off of his back to a certain extent. People have already put him on the hot seat and all sort of stuff. I don't subscribe to that necessarily because I think he's got a good team this year, and I think they're going to get to bowl eligible. I think they're going to get to 7, and maybe it wouldn't shock me if they surprise some folks along the way. But wouldn't that cool things off quite a bit for Billy Napier? I mean, wouldn't that just kind of calm things down a little bit and kind of prove, hey, we might not be where we want to be, playing for and competing for SEC championships, competing for national championships. Maybe we're not there yet. And in year 3, you'd like to be, but we're moving in the right direction. And just trust the staff enough to believe that in time, they're going to be able to finally knock down the door, go toe-to-toe with some of their rivals in the sport, and potentially elevate to the point where they get to that championship contender status. And how would it affect Mario Cristobal? I think it'd be a lot of fallout from this game. I think this is the most significant game week 1 in terms of writing a narrative for each coach. Billy Napier loses the game. Oh, well, he's a dead man walking. Well, he wins the game. He's everybody's All-American. Same can be said for Mario Cristobal. He wins the game. Miami's back. He loses the game. Mario's can't get it done. I don't think either is true, by the way. I think Billy Napier could lose this game and still go on to have a really nice season. Miami's just that good. And I think Mario Cristobal and Miami could lose this game and still rally and end up making the playoffs. It could definitely happen with their roster and with the personnel they have on both sides of the ball. But people would immediately overreact to whatever the outcome is. And in this case that we presented, if Florida beats Miami in week 1, people are going to be suggesting that the Mario Cristobal experiment hasn't worked. It's not accurate, but that will be the reaction. It'll be strong, it'll be visceral, and it'll probably be unnecessary. But that's why we love college football. We care a lot and we overreact a lot as well. Let's move on next to what happens if USC beats LSU in week 1. Now, so much off-season about this game, how USC has been trying to get out of it since Lincoln Riley got the job, and this has been that, and this has been this. Like, I don't really care. It just doesn't bother me. Like, if I were Lincoln Riley, I wouldn't want to play the game either. If I were Brian Kelly, I don't know if I'd want to play the game. Like, that's a tough game. Week 1, you don't know what you got. You're going against an offense that's super dynamic. What if your defense isn't ready? I mean, we're going to overreact to whatever happens in this game. If LSU beats USC or if USC beats LSU and the final score is 56-52, which wouldn't really surprise anybody, then the immediate reaction is, oh, well, the Anton Lynn experiment at defensive coordinator for SC didn't work. Oh, well, the Blake Baker experiment at LSU, same problems as they had before. Nothing's changed. There's going to be strong overreaction in this game as well. But if USC beats LSU, wouldn't that cool things off a little bit for Lincoln Riley? Now, whoever ends up being the quarterback, let's just operate right now under the assumption that it's Miller Moss. Whoever ends up being the quarterback, people have always said, well, Lincoln Riley's only won with first overall picks at quarterback. He's only won with Baker and Kyler and Caleb. But wouldn't this prove that clearly the system is tried and true and that the guy can win with whoever? And maybe he can still recruit super elite talent at difference-making positions offensively. Now look at their offense, guys. They're going to be very difficult to defend. So if SC beats LSU, you know what that probably means? It means Zachariah Branch probably created a couple of big explosive plays. And there's some buzz already coming out of LSU's camp that they've given up some big plays in the passing game. Probably means that Deuce Robinson, their 6'6" weapon that's now moved to wide receiver, he's probably caught a couple of one-on-one jump balls. Probably means that they went to the other trio of wide receivers that are all excellent. Jacoby Lane, Kyron Hudson, Makai Lemon. Means that those guys probably went off, and these guys are blue chip prospects, and they're going against a defense that has questions. So it means that they probably won in a shootout, in a track beat. And while I think if SC beats them in more conventional score, say 35-31, will the reaction about their defense's challenges still be pretty much the same? Probably. People probably say, well, the Anton Lynn, they're still going to have to win with offense. They're still going to have to win track meets. They're still going to have to win. And it's not going to be the improved defense that you would expect. Well, maybe you should just give Anton Lynn time. I mean, Anton Lynn took UCLA from 92nd in scoring, 117th in negative play rate, and 97th in QBR, all the way to 14th, 5th, and 19th, respectively. That's pretty good. That's pretty good over the course of a very short period of time. Lincoln Riley also packed the staff. He went out and got Doug Belk, who was the defensive coordinator at Houston. He went out and got North Dakota State head coach Matt Entz. They went out and got NFL defensive line coach from the Los Angeles Rams, who's coached Aaron Donald for the last couple of years. Like, they've stocked the staff. So if things don't look great week 1, does that mean they won't look great week 8? I don't think that's necessarily true, because that group will likely improve as the season goes along. So I think if SC beats LSU, it's probably going to have to be in a high-scoring affair, because I love LSU's offense and I love USC's personnel offensively. But we're probably going to draw some major conclusions based on what LSU's defense didn't do and what USC's defense didn't do as well. Hey, thanks so much for being with us. It was great to visit with Colin Cowherd, get his perspective on the upcoming college football season, and dive into a few more what-ifs, because the what-ifs, that's pretty much what the offseason's all about. What if this? What if that? I love diving into these possibilities because they're real. Some of these what-ifs will come to fruition and the fallout from some of them will be pretty significant. So we always appreciate you guys being here. Like, rate, subscribe to the podcast wherever you get your podcast. If you are new to the show, we appreciate you being here, but spread the good word. Tell 3 friends about Always College Football. And if you haven't told 3 friends, then I can't help you. But it'd be awesome if you could continue to spread the good word about what we're doing here in covering the sport that you guys love just like we love as well. So for all of us here at Always College Football, from Mark, Jake, Jack, the other Jack, I'm Greg. We hope you have an amazing day, and remember, it's always college football. Hey guys, it's Greg McElroy. Thanks for watching Always College Football. Make sure you like, rate, and subscribe to ESPN's YouTube channel and wherever you listen to your podcasts.